Oh, well, I'm pleased to say we are actually sat in Østervester and it is snowing. It's January and I'm in the kitchen of landscape photographer Matt Botwood. We're outside the small village of Østervester in the Brecon Beacons where he lives, and there's a thick bed of snow out there. We had quite an interesting journey getting to the place, and fortunately Matt came to rescue us in his four-wheel drive because we would never have made it here in our cars.
Yes.
And it's very nice to meet you, Matt.
Yes, nice to meet you too, Rob. Yeah,
good.
Very nice.
So tell us, how did you come to this woolly bit of Wales?
Well, I'm obviously not Welsh.
Yeah.
You might be able to tell from my accent. I've always loved the countryside, and I've always wanted to live in the middle of nowhere. And I suppose we had an opportunity a few years ago, back quite a long time ago now, back in year 2000, when my wife moved jobs and we were looking for a new house near Bristol. I know this isn't near Bristol, but that's the way things go. And we saw this house in the estate agents, and it just looked fantastic. I mean, you see this house in the middle of nowhere. I mean, obviously you're sitting here now. You know where we are. It's pretty isolated, pretty remote. Not most people's idea of an ideal property. It's a long way to John Lewis from here. You wouldn't want to nip down the shops for a bottle of milk if you've forgotten one. But I just love living in the landscape itself. In the mountains. We're about 1,000 foot up here. Mm-hmm. So we're exposed to quite a lot of weather, as you can see. Mm-hmm. It's snowy here, but as where I picked you up from wasn't too bad. So it does change quite a lot.
Yes, it's definitely a lot worse up here than
I'd say. I mean, landscape photography is all about the weather, and you certainly get a lot of it up here. Unfortunately, most of it is rain.
Yes, we had noticed recently,
which is less useful, but it's worth it for days like today.
Yes,
when the snow
yeah,
is.
when you really want to be out with your camera and there's some idiot doing an interview with you.
Absolutely, yeah. I'd love to be on the
well worth it, yes. Okay, so tell us a bit about your past in photography and sort of how you've developed.
I was interested in photography from a very early age. I think I probably had my first camera when I was about 7 or 8, and I mean, those
similar story.
At first, it was just one of those cameras where you took pictures and it got sent off, the whole camera, and it came back.
Yeah.
But it didn't take long before I wanted something better, and a friend of the family gave me an old Zorki, one of those Russian Leica knockoffs. Mm-hmm. And I just found I really, really enjoyed taking photographs, and the rest of my family weren't really interested, so I'd be the one taking the family snaps. Mm. And then when I got into my teenage years, and I'd replaced that camera with something that worked a bit better, slightly more reliable. Both myself and my best friend at the time, we decided that we wanted to develop our own film. So we both set up dark rooms in our bedrooms, and so went from there, really. I'm sure all the photographs I developed then, and I do still have some, I'm sure they were all awful. But at least it introduced me to the process of developing your own pictures, which I think was quite important in photography. It's not just about snapping them, sending them off, and seeing the results come back. It's, the process itself was quite important to me then, although I don't use film now, of course. And I so really got into it, and then I left it for quite a long time. Went to university, disappeared off into a career in IT, and then
this is almost a complete mirror of my existence.
And actually, if you look at a lot of photographers' biographies, a lot of them have taken that sort of path. But while I was working in an IT career, I still enjoyed taking snaps of where we went on holiday. Although those snaps started to get a bit more serious, I really wanted to capture the essence of the place. And then I had an opportunity when we decided to have children. One of us really couldn't have that sort of career anymore. Couldn't have this career where we're travelling a lot. So I offered to give up, become the house husband, and that's given me an opportunity really to start focusing on photography a lot more. Interestingly, initially at first I thought, that's okay, I'm a photographer, I know what I'm doing, I can go out and I can take photographs and I can sell them in local galleries. And I think I realise now that I wasn't a very good photographer then, but I was quite good at maybe selling the work, so I could actually sell quite a lot of the work.
I'm agreeing because it's a familiar story rather than I'm agreeing that you weren't a good photographer, by the way.
Well, I think
I've been there.
Everybody develops with time, but I think you can... if you work hard enough, you can get places to sell your photographs.
Yes.
Certainly, living in a place like the Brecon Beacons, there are plenty of tourist outlets to sell what we might term pretty landscapes. And it's relatively easy to produce those sorts of images, not to belittle those that produce them professionally, because some of them are incredible images. But I found it relatively easy to sell some of those images. But then what I was doing was I was spending all my time going around finding new outlets for the work, finding new shops trying to sell more, going out producing more work to sell, producing greetings cards. I was sort of turning into this factory of producing consumer purchasable images, which wasn't really what I wanted to do. It's not really the sort of photography I was interested in. Because although I love landscape photography, I've been interested for quite a long time in more abstract images as well. And although I would carry on producing those images, I'd find that go to Brecon Craft Fair and you can't really sell an abstract image. People are expecting pictures of the mountains, and so I sort of pulled back from that a bit. I'm in a lucky position to be able to do that. My wife works very hard to keep me in this world of photography, and yeah, I pulled back a bit from that. Didn't worry so much about trying to sell the work, and spent probably the last maybe 5 years or so focusing more on taking the sort of images I want. And really, there's two types of photography I do. I really enjoy walking in the landscape, really enjoy getting up the mountains, and I still take a lot of pictures in those situations. And those images generally are the ones that are still saleable. They get converted into prints, taken to galleries in Brecon and sold. But that's really just my love of the landscape, and the photography is somewhat secondary to that. I'd go out walking anyway.
So it's almost a record.
Yes, it is. It is a record. It is a record, but it's a record of a place that maybe other people can appreciate too. I mean, what I find with a lot of standard landscape photography is that you can appreciate it. I can appreciate it if you've been to that place. So when I see other landscape images of the sort of typical genre of landscape imagery, if I've been to that place, I think, oh, that's it's a lovely shot of that place. I remember standing there. But if it's a place I haven't been to, and it's a fairly standard landscape photograph, I have trouble appreciating it. It's a bit like showing someone your holiday snaps. And I mean, recently I've been doing that online with all my old slide scans. When someone's been to a place that you post a picture of, they start commenting on it, and it's quite interesting to them. But if it's of a completely alien place, it doesn't really matter how good the straight photograph is. You don't tend to get as much feedback because people just look at it and take it for the image. I mean, we're surrounded by images today. Guidebooks, internet, TV. There's so many good images of the landscape out there. You have to have some sort of connection with that image. And so either you've been there and it's a lovely place and it's a pretty image, or there's something a bit more interesting about the image. And I suppose that's really what I'm trying to focus on now, is producing images that are quite local to here most of the time, but they also mean a bit more to me. Say a bit more about the landscape than, oh, isn't this a pretty place?
How much are they about the landscape and how much are they maybe about the photographer?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I don't know if I can answer that, because I tend to not reveal my feelings, or I don't think I reveal my feelings. I probably do in my photographs. And maybe that's the only way I do it. I'm sort of a typical bloke in some ways. You don't talk about a lot of stuff. But maybe photography is that outlet for me, although I don't like to make it too obvious maybe, but certainly some of the images I produced, recent series Into the Darkness, where I went into a small bit of forestry near here, and part of that was just challenging my own fear, because I never went in there initially when I saw this bit of forest, because it was very dark, and I'm actually quite scared of going into the middle of a dark forest, as a lot of people are, but by turning it into a bit of a photographic project, it forced me to do that. It forced me to maybe challenge my fears in that way.
So really, landscape photography has become a form of self-expression for you, hasn't it?
Yes, probably, it almost certainly has.
Yeah, and I think that's probably true for a lot of us.
Yeah. I mean, I can't write. Well, I wish I could write, but I sometimes wish, it'd be great if I could write poetry. But I can't do that. But what I can do is I can take photographs.
I just irritate people online with mine. But there's a big difference, isn't there, between seeing it as a form of self-expression and seeing it as a record?
Oh, there is, and that's why I think there are two branches to the photography I do at the moment. And interestingly, there are two groups of people, almost two populations in the world, and some that are more interested in just your record of where you've been, because perhaps they are just a lover of the countryside, and some more interested in your more personal work because they're more interested in you as a person, or how you're expressing yourself, or the images that you've produced as part of that expression of your feelings and fears or whatever. Yes. Yeah.
I don't know, do you have to be interested in the person, or is it a question of maybe those images reach people in a different way?
I don't think you have to be interested in the person. Maybe you have to be interested in what they're trying to say.
Yeah.
Everybody shares certain feelings and certain fears and certain experiences and emotions, and if the images you produce chime with some of the emotions or some of the feelings they have, people generally have an emotional response to that sort of photography, and that emotional response, is it because it's similar to them or something that affects them in some way. I think that's more. It's not it's not the person. It's whether or not they can understand and relate to those feelings and those experiences.
Mm-hmm. Looking out the window here, this might seem like a fairly obvious question, but why landscape?
Why landscape? That is a good question, really, because I have tried lots of forms of photography, lots of styles of photography.
You dabbled in a bit of wedding photography?
No. Actually, no. I can absolutely say wedding is one form of photography I've never touched. Even members of my extended family who've asked me, saying, the typical question, "Oh, you're a photographer. Will you do our wedding for us? Will you do your cousin's wedding?" No, I have no interest whatsoever in wedding photography. Mm-hmm. I think there are probably maybe 2 or 3 people that are interested in one set of wedding photographs. One of them's the photographer, and the other one is the bride and groom, probably, the bride and groom's parents. I went to a lot of effort when I had got married, and I chose a wedding photographer to choose a fantastic wedding photographer. But I wouldn't expect anybody else to appreciate those images in the same way. So no, wedding photography certainly not. I did when I started out. When I gave up my IT job and moved to photography, I started doing family portraits. Mm-hmm. Because having a young family myself, it was good practice material, and it's quite an easy thing to do. And around here there aren't any studios really, so it was easy to go to people's houses and do that sort of work. But again, that was a style of photography that it can be lucrative, you can make money doing it, but it wasn't personally rewarding for me. Mm-hmm. And as my own children got older, I realised how hard it was to photograph them well as well. They're not the most compliant subjects. Yes. But I admire all sorts of photography. Probably one of the areas of photography I admire most is street photography, and partly that's because I'm so rubbish at it. When I look at books of street photography, I'm just so amazed that people have managed to capture that moment, because I wouldn't be quick enough. I'd still be trying to work out whether or not the image has been composed properly. So maybe that's the thing about landscape, is I love being in a landscape. I love walking in the mountains. I love travelling to new places. But also the landscape is static. I don't have to worry about people in my images, and I don't particularly enjoy taking pictures of people when they haven't been giving me permission. So that sort of street photography style of photograph, and I don't find it rewarding when they have given me permission. Sort of portrait photography. So I think it's because I enjoy being in the landscape so much anyway. You're right, where I live, there aren't many other forms of photography that are so easily accessible where I live. If I wanted to do any other form of photography, it would be tricky, but I probably wouldn't be as interested in it anyway.
Yeah. All makes sense to me. So tell us a bit about your processes. Are you digital, analog?
Digital. I think I last shot a roll of film 5-10 years ago. But it doesn't really matter, does it? To me, it's really just the end result that you get. It is all digital. It's all done in Lightroom. Do you care? I don't know. I think the process is important to me in what I have to add to the image, because most of the images I produce are not what people would call straight photography. One group of people would just say, "Oh, you've messed around with that too much in Photoshop." Actually, I never really use Photoshop, but I'm much more of a pictorialist than of the F64 group. Certainly, I can go out and produce a normal landscape picture if I want to, and
But I mean, actually, even if you look at Ansel Adams before he'd done the printing part of it, the finished process, he knew what he wanted to bring out from the images, even though that may not be necessarily something you'd share.
Yes, yeah, he did, and I, for a lot of my images, I tend to work in series, as you're aware, and I know when I'm taking those images how they're going to be processed and how they're going to be produced. But the way a lot of those series start may be accident, and there may be processing accidents in some cases. So I don't subscribe to this view that you have to have predefined everything you're going to do before you set out with your camera. The large format film photographer who has this one image in mind hikes to the point in the landscape, sets up their camera, waits 4 hours, exposes one frame of film, and that's perfect. And actually some digital photographers work in the same way. There's almost a competition to see how few frames of film you can expose at a location to produce what you want. I don't have any problems with taking lots of pictures while I'm there, because I tend to sort of think on my feet while I'm in the landscape, and things change, clouds move. I might not be happy with the composition when I look at it later on, and while you're there, why not take some more pictures? We don't all walk around with our eyes closed and open them at the point that we want the photograph, and that's just taking this whole extreme.
Well, I think I was talking to Brian on the way up in the car, and I was saying how I like to spend quite a lot of time in the landscape these days. And in a previous life, I was one of those people who would sort of drive to the spot, wait for the light and take a photograph and then leave. And I found that very unsatisfying. I didn't have time to think, I didn't have time to develop a response to the landscape, I suppose.
No, I think that's important, because a lot of the time when I'm in the landscape, I'm out to enjoy the landscape, and I'm walking through it, and something will happen. Some light will change, the weather will change, or I'll come across something that I haven't seen before, or I see it in a different way to the way I've seen it before, even when I'm walking the same routes again and again. And that's when I think, well, this would make an interesting image, and this means something to me. And that's when I'll make that image. I think by preparing everything in advance and planning what you're going to do, you can only be disappointed. Because you either get the image that you've got, which is fine, you've succeeded there, or 99% of the time, you don't get the image that you really want and you haven't really planned.
And you hear that so often, don't you? People come online and say, it wasn't what I was expecting.
That's right. Or blaming the Met Office, the
exactly.
weather forecast.
But of course, the job of the photographer is to respond to what's in front of you.
That's right. You can't control the weather. Certainly not around here.
No.
And you don't have much control over the light. Yes, you know where the sun rises and the sun sets. But really, for a lot of my photography, that's not important, because I tend to be deep in some woods somewhere, so the sun is less of an issue. But I don't know. For instance, for today, it's lovely and snowy out there. If I wasn't sitting here at my kitchen table, I would undoubtedly go out for a walk somewhere. But I wouldn't have any idea about what images I was going to produce in the landscape, because that the primary reason for going out would be to have a walk in the snow, enjoy the countryside, see amazing views. The vista of the mountains would be beautiful. I wouldn't take those pictures necessarily, but then I might stumble across something in the snow, maybe some twigs poking out the snow, very, very trivial, or some ice somewhere, a pattern of ice in a puddle, and that might capture my attention. And I think that those things can be missed if you go out with a single purpose in mind. I'm going to hike to this ridge, I'm going to stand at this point, I'm going to point the camera this way. You have to look and see what's beneath your feet sometimes as well.
Sure.
A lot of my photography is not a big picture, it is very much detail, and details that people would.
Does this also apply to your series work? That you don't really know what you're going to take until you get there?
Well,
do you go out and say, I'm going to visit this particular woodland because that's where I make these images, even if maybe you don't know what the particular image is going to be?
Yeah, I'll have a place in mind. Several series that I've got ongoing at the moment, but one of them, Travels in a Strange Land, Dark Spaces, I couldn't confine myself to the same piece of woodland for all those images, because I would actually run out of material. Although I do revisit the same bits of wood, but I do look on maps and think, well, that will be a nice bit of wood. That's got potential, or there's a stream down there. It might have potential. I'll go there. But then it's just a case of wandering around and seeing what I find. And that particular series is very problematic because they're negative images. I can't actually see a negative, like most people. So it is a bit of luck. There is a bit of serendipity in there as well. But over time, you get a better idea of what's going to work and what doesn't work. So for those series, I will set out for a particular location, but it's a vague area, a section of woodland or a valley that looks like it might be interesting, and often isn't. But because my whole raison d'etre for being out there is to be in the landscape, I might not find anything for that series, but I might find something else. And actually, a lot of these series have started by accident, by finding something that was interesting, and maybe I could take this further.
So how important are your sort of finishing processes? Obviously, you presumably take most images in colour on your digital camera and then convert them into black and white in Lightroom?
Yeah, I mean, they're all the images are taken in RAW format on my digital camera. And I don't change the display on the back of the camera to show it in black and white because it doesn't really help me because I can't change the display to show it in negative, which if I could, I may well do that because it may save me some time.
Do you try and see in black and white through your sort of mind's eye so that you get an idea how you're going to process it when you get back? Or is that finishing process almost a sort of finishing touch, a layer of actually this is what I want this to say?
Okay, so I don't see it in black and white necessarily, but most of the subject matter for that particular series are very monochromatic anyway. I mean, there's not much colour. If you looked at the original images, you wouldn't see a lot of colour in there because they're generally details under tree roots and in woodland, and there's not a great deal of colour there. So what I tend to be looking for is making sure that there aren't too many really, really, really bright highlights because that just ruins the whole image. I don't want too many really dark blacks in there. I want to try and bring out what's in the shadows in these images, and to do that, I need to make sure I can actually extract the detail from those shadows when I convert it to negative. So it's more of looking at the tonality of the image of the scene and seeing whether or not it's going to work when I convert it to negative. So when the darkest things that I'm looking at, that I'm trying to actually show in my images, are visible, what's going to happen to the rest of the image? And I don't really want that very hot, strong contrast black and white image that you might go out and look for when I'm looking for normal black and white landscapes. I do quite like very high contrast images. I'm a great fan of Bill Brandt's style of image, so I will look for that. But certainly for those images, no. But in terms of the negative, the processing afterwards, I will generally take 4 or 5 at least shots with slightly different compositions at the scene, and because the final images are square, I've obviously got a bit of flexibility left and right, and I don't ignore that straight away. I don't try and compose it square there because every time I've tried to do that, it never works because you never know what's going to happen when you convert it to negative. So you've got to have a bit of flexibility to move the composition around a little bit when you've seen it. But then it's a case of just converting it to negative and then seeing whether or not there's anything there that you thought was there that's worth cropping into square image.
So it's part of the appeal for you actually making those discoveries.
Yes, no, I think I've likened it to sort of a Victorian explorer. You get a naturalist. You go into the environment. You collect lots of samples, and my samples just happen to be digital images. You collect lots of samples, and then you get back to your laboratory, and you see if you've actually discovered any new species. And sometimes those new species are quite shockingly different to how you expected they would be when you convert them to negative. And that's what I like. I like the surprise and the discovery in those negative images.
It's very similar to my Marmot's Wood series, which is, for the benefit of those who don't know, of double exposures, and you really don't know what's going to happen with a double exposure. You get to learn a little bit, but sometimes they can so radically transform an image.
Yeah, very transformative.
Very, very. Bring out things that are completely unexpected. And that's quite a delight when it works.
Yes.
It doesn't work that often, sadly.
I suppose also with multiple exposures, you have the option of changing it a bit when you're back at the computer, how you combine them together. Whereas
most definitely, yeah.
So unfortunately, the negative is the negative. I can't do much with it beyond that. A lot of them get deleted. So, which again may shock some people. You don't go out and you've got this perfect subject in matter in mind, and I don't. I just have a broad area that is going to provide something that I might be interested in.
Yeah, Marmot's Wood for me is a culmination of thousands of images taken over 18 months. I think in the end I only produced 49 images from it.
But I think that's the same as any photography. If you look back at the the negatives and the contact strips of some really great photographers in the past, there's an awful lot of rubbish in there. That Henri Cartier-Bresson, Ansel Adams, there's an awful lot of images there that you wouldn't necessarily bother printing, and they haven't bothered printing in a lot of cases.
Yeah. I think it's important that people experiment, isn't it? So, congratulations on your success in this year's Landscape Photographer of the Year.
Yep, well, it was a shock to me.
It was a surprise to all of us, I think.
I think I was looking through the book the other day, and I was very, very surprised at why them choosing those images to put in the book, because they are so different to pretty much everything else there. And everyone I've shown the book to has said that, your images are really quite different from the rest of the book. And I never know whether it's a compliment or not, or whether it's a criticism that they're not real landscape photographs. But I was very surprised they were selected because of that. And I didn't enter that many of those images, those types of image, because I didn't think they had a chance, to be honest. But I thought there ought to be some in there because they represent the majority of the work I'm doing at the moment. So they represent me as a photographer, and so I'm particularly pleased that they chose them, because it's a vindication of the work I've been doing, that this is my style of photography, and yes, some other people appreciate it. That's nice. That's nice. I'll carry on doing it anyway, even if they weren't. But that's just me.
So does it mean anything for you, commercially, personally?
No, it's a bit of local publicity. It was nice. Although, I think I had an article in the Brecon and Radnor Express, the local paper, and I was saying, it's, put these photographs in there, and then there was a note at the end saying, you can buy prints from this gallery in Brecon. But I think people would be very disappointed if they went there to buy those prints, because they wouldn't have found the same images.
They would have found the conventional landscapes.
Because that's what's commercially viable. So I don't think it makes a lot of difference. It's nice, I suppose, to have your photography recognised by your peers. Which is really what it is. I don't enter a lot of competitions, although actually this year I've entered quite a few just for a bit of fun. But I've always entered the Landscape Photographer of the Year competition because it felt like that was the genre I was working in, and therefore I ought to be entering my images to see how they stack up against the competition. I suppose it's competition. And there are some images that are published every year in that competition that I'm impressed by, and I wouldn't say I'd like to be able to produce them, because one thing I'm very conscious of is looking at other people's images too much to the extent that you think, I would like to produce something like that, and then you end up going and copying it, and that's really not the idea. That really, your photography should be your photography and your style of photography, and there is a great risk when you see an image of a place or a style of image that you like, that you then just emulate that image. And I know I've seen people now try and do that with negative images when they've seen my images, and that's fine. That's it's good to experiment. Because I do it as well. I mean, I've tried some double exposures after seeing some of your images. Mine are awful. mostly concerns the bin. They are really hard. And equally, I'm sure everybody on the beach has taken pictures of patterns in the sand after seeing Michael Jackson's pictures of Poppet Sands. But they're never going to be as good, and they're also never going to be as original. And I think originality maybe is important, not just for the sake of it, but it's important to have something about your work that is definably you. If you're just producing generic landscape images that anybody with a reasonable amount of expertise and talent could produce, is that really satisfying? I don't know. For me, it isn't. It might be commercially satisfying if you can sell those images, but is it artistically satisfying? I mean, recently, so there's been a lot of high winds, there's been a lot of waves on the sea. So Porthcawl, everybody who has a camera in Wales seems to go down there and take pictures of waves crashing over the sea wall at Porthcawl. And some of those images I quite like. There's some quite nice images. They've captured a nice wave. It's a nice picture. But after you've seen about 50 of them, it gets a bit wearing. Where's the talent there? It's the talent in pressing the shutter at the right moment. It's the talent in how it gets processed. Whereas the talent in just making sure you put your tripod in the place before somebody else got there. I don't know if there's...
Well, I know Porthcawl quite well, and I can tell you there are... there's about 10 metres where you basically be able to stand if it's very windy, apart from anything else, because it's, so, I mean,
It's
to
quite
get that
limited,
shot.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're not having to think an awful lot. So, who or what influences your work then? What
Well,
inspires you?
So from what I've just said then, obviously I
Yeah.
don't want to be influenced by other people, because by
Yeah.
doing that I then end up emulating and copying them. I think, I mean, I've got a few photography books, like most people have. I think probably the work I find most inspiring is the work that is quite different from my own work. As I mentioned earlier, street photography. I find that style of photography inspiring because it's something I couldn't do or wouldn't do. Although it's very, very far removed from the sort of images I produce. So I find that inspiring, wanting me to sort of produce better images in my own genre. Can I produce images that a street photographer would look at and think, wow, how on earth could you do that? That I suppose that's one thing that drives me forward. But then there are other images that I'm particularly inspired by. I do like the more abstract forms of landscape photography. Now, of course, I'm just trying to think of some examples. Looking over at my photography shelf over there, it is very hard. I mean, and without, of course, mentioning people like yourself, which I can't do because that would be terrible. I couldn't say that I'm inspired by your work, Rob. But in terms of abstract images, I mentioned just now Mike Jackson's Pop It Sounds images. I mean, I find them incredibly inspiring on two levels. First of all, I love the images on their own right, individually as abstracts. They're fantastic, but also a single-mindedness to stick with that one subject for so long and produce such a long series of images. I mean, I tend to work in series quite a lot, but I don't have many series that have been going on that long. That is really quite impressive. I think that's a testament to not only your own I think what the word is there. It's
trusting the art almost, isn't it?
It is.
It's trusting yourself to know that something will keep coming from it fresh.
That's right, and irrespective of the feedback you're getting from other people, because what I've found with producing even a series, my current series is up to about 105 images, after the first 5 or so, a lot of people that you're showing them to get a bit, well, I won't say bored, but they're desensitized to the images. They've seen images like that before, so it becomes harder and harder to make them go, wow, that's amazing, it's so different, because it's part of a series. So it isn't so different, it's quite similar in lots of ways, but the differences are very small. And to then just carry on through that and carry on producing them because you want to, I think there's a big drive in photography, especially with all online social media, to produce images that instantly wow people. If you carry on publishing images in a series and you get no responses whatsoever, there's a big temptation to just stop.
Yes.
Which is wrong, because you're doing it for yourself. You shouldn't be doing it for how many likes, retweets, follows you're getting on social media. But that's the way that the human psyche works. We all like positive feedback. So to carry on with a long series like Mike has done, and like I'm trying to do in some ways with some of my series, is a challenge. But so someone who's done that, Mike, really does inspire me to carry on doing what I'm doing, I suppose.
So why the series? What is it about series? What's the difference between a series and a single image?
I don't find a single image very satisfying. You can, yes, it's great. You can produce some nice single images, and you can appreciate them on lots of different levels. It might just be a pretty picture, for want of a better phrase. It might show something of yourself. But what a series allows you to do, I think, is really explore a subject. I don't like just stopping at that the one. Even in the within the landscape and places I've been before, you go back and visit them again. And although that's not a series, it's a similar thing. But I also like the fact that the series is a bit of a journey, and part of that journey is that you'll go down routes that turn out to be dead ends and have to retrace your steps, and that's okay. You're allowed to experiment. You're allowed to maybe make mistakes in a series, whereas a single image, that's it. You're defined by that single image, and you either like it or you don't, and people either appreciate it for what it is or they don't. With the series, you can sort of grow with you. You can explore new areas. You can try different things, and it can develop into something else. I mean, some of my series have had offshoots Certainly the Travels in a Strange Land, Dark Spaces series, there's been a few images that work quite well in colour, and that wasn't to be expected. There's been some other negative images of different subject matter that I've produced that I quite like, and maybe they'll form part of a new series as well. So I like the developing side of it. I like the fact that it's not the start and finish. You can carry on, and I suppose when you stop a series is the trouble. I mean, some are defined quite well. Some people define their series by a period of time. This year I'm spending a lot of time at my clear standing stone over the valley the whole year, and it will end at the end of the year, that series. How it will end, I don't know. What it will look like, I don't know yet. It's only January after all. But then there are some series, like my other series, Dark Spaces series, which could go on forever. Like Mike Jackson's Puppet Sound series, they could go on forever. There is potentially a limitless variety in nature to carry on providing you with source material for your images.
And do you find a series forces you to look afresh, or look more closely, or examine your motivations, or any of those things?
It depends on the series, I suppose. With a series, you can very quickly exhaust your initial ideas, and then that does require you to put a bit more effort into it, I suppose. I'm just trying to I can then think of examples where I've had series where you don't have to look afresh very much. But I think certainly with more abstract images anyway, you are always constantly looking afresh for new ways of producing new images. I think I could have stopped. I produced the first image that started that series was luck, serendipity as we like to call it, because luck doesn't sound as good, does it? I had a subject matter. It looked quite interesting. I photographed it. It didn't look so interesting after I photographed it, but then I started playing around with it, using some of the processes I developed, and turned it into a negative, and I thought, that's very interesting. So all of a sudden. So I could have stopped at that. I produced this one image. It was, greatly appreciated on social media. I should have stopped at that. That would have been it. But then I thought, well, this has potential. This has potential, and I went out a bit again. What else will produce an image along the lines of this that will produce something interesting when it's turned into negative? And I suppose that that exploration of constantly looking for new things that will pop out once you convert it to negative. I suppose that's driven me forward.
So it's a beautiful day out there. There's a bit of watery sunlight. I just saw a red kite fly past, and it's quite a thick layer of snow. So if you were heading out today, what would you be thinking you were looking for? Would you have a commercial eye open, or would you just wander and see?
I'd wander and see. I mean, I think in a day like today with all the snow on the mountains, I just want to get up high and see the landscape covered in snow. It's such a beautiful sight, and I would have a wander around, and if there was anything that took my eye, I would try and make an image that pleased me. But I wouldn't be looking for something necessarily commercially viable. That doesn't. I say it doesn't bother me. It's not an issue I have to worry about. I'm very lucky about that. But no, I'll be out there to enjoy the countryside really more than anything.
And that's quite important to you.
Yes, I mean, I think if you live in the countryside, you ought to enjoy it. I think a lot of photographers treat the countryside as a sort of a toolbox that they can use to produce their images. I don't necessarily think they're lovers of the countryside. They're lovers of the image they produce when they're in the countryside, and that's fine. If that's the way they work, I don't have a problem with that. But for me, first and foremost, I'm a lover of the countryside, and if I can capture the essence of that countryside in either a fairly straight photograph or a very abstract image for other people to enjoy, then that's great.
Do you ever find that you get your camera out and you become completely absorbed in the photography and you almost forget about your surroundings for a little while?
Not if I was up a mountain. I find that very hard to do when I'm out walking, proper hill walking. So if I've gone out for a walk, that's that will take precedence. If I'm in the depths of a wood, I sometimes get more absorbed in the photographs I'm taking than the surroundings, because to be honest, the surroundings are better off forgotten sometimes because they're quite scary.
Yeah.
You're sitting in the middle of a dark forestry plantation, trying to make an image with all sorts of strange animal noises going on around you. I generally rather try and forget those. But no, generally the landscape is what I'm looking at. I don't spend my entire walk with the viewfinder pressed to my face, looking for the next image. I'll walk a very long way. Sometimes I'll walk all day and maybe only get my camera out once or twice, and those images will all get deleted. I'll wander around. If I see something interesting, I'll stop maybe for 5-10 minutes, but then camera goes away and it's appreciate the countryside. That's what it's all about. Or also appreciate the exercise I'm getting. There's a big element to that. I think like a lot of people, I don't get enough exercise, although I get a lot more than most people because I go out walking. And part of the enjoyment is getting out of breath, walking up a steep hill, a sense of achievement, burning off some calories, justifying that next chocolate biscuit.
Interesting, actually, because I think I've got almost... When I go out to take photographs in the landscape, I'm very, very focused on the job in hand, and it completely absorbs me. If I'm going for a walk, I'll probably actually... Generally, these days, I'll just say I'm not taking the camera so that I just focus on the walk. Do you ever get that?
As I said, no, probably not. No, I do go out for a walk, but photography is always there as an option. I don't, apart from in that environment where I'm there's nothing really to look at, and I've just gone out to take pictures for a certain series. Generally, my walking in the landscape is not focused on the photography. Photography is secondary to the enjoyment of the landscape.
Yeah. Okay. So you've got a lot of series. You've done a lot of series. You've got quite a few up and running at the moment.
Yes.
How many do you think you can do at one time? Don't do them justice.
Well, so some of the series that are ongoing, I think I have a series called... Well, I know I have a series called Unseen Beacons, which is more... As I see an image that I know will fit into that series, I'll take it. But I don't go out purposefully looking for images for that series. So I have a number of series that are sort of on the back burner, that they will get added to over time. And at some point, they will not get added to for a very long time, and we'll have to just consider them finished, and that will be it. But actively going out and looking for images, generally I have 2, maybe 3 series ongoing at a time. But there'll always be one that's taking precedence. There'll be one that I'm actually going out looking for new locations.
So what are you working on at the moment?
Well, I'm sort of between at the moment, really. But I've just sort of coming to the end of this Travels in the Strange Land Dark Spaces series. But I don't envisage it ending anytime soon. But probably what I will do is take a bit of a rest from it while I concentrate on the new project for this year, which is a year at Myclere, the Standing Stone. Because I find I can't focus solely on I can't concentrate on 2 projects to that extent. I can have one main project that I'm focusing on and doing some research for, and then a number of other projects that have been started and are underway that I can add to. And I can then pause one and go on to the other one and concentrate on that more. But I can't focus on multiple projects at any one time.
Yeah.
To the same extent, it doesn't really work like that for me. But I can certainly have them ongoing.
Okay, tell me a little about Travels in a Strange Land. To my mind, that's probably your most distinctive series. What does it mean?
What does it mean? Well, so it's interesting in titles of series and where they come from. And I suppose, if you first of all take the title, Travels in a Strange Land, Dark Spaces as a subtitle. It really came out of, there's two reasons, 2 meanings for it. Travels in a Strange Land is partly to do with the fact that these are negative images. The strange land is the world viewed in negative. But also the strange land is that when these places are viewed in negative, they can take on the appearance of alien or mythical places, mythical landscapes, and contain strange creatures. And that's really the Travels in a Strange Land part of it. It has 2 facets. partly technique and partly the resulting image and what I've been looking for and trying to produce in the final images. And the dark spaces part of it it's really because the source of these images are generally very dark spaces, under trees, but by river banks, under rocks, fallen trees. That they're places that only really work when they're viewed in negative, because otherwise they'd just be a big black hole. So that's where the dark spaces comes from, really. And the reason that for the sort of two parts of the title is that I initially started off with this Travels in a Strange Land, working in negative, looking at a number of other series as well. I had a very short one called Alien Skies, which again was negatives. They were negative. They were colour. They were actually images of the river surface that when viewed in negative in colour, do look like some strange sky or strange sunset from a planet that you can't quite recognise, because the clouds aren't right, because they're not clouds. Although you don't know that when you're looking at the images. So I suppose I left it open because I was so excited when I initially saw some of these negatives. I thought, well, there's a lot of potential here, which is ridiculous, really, because photographers 20, 30 years ago would be so used to seeing negative images as part of their processing, it wouldn't be unusual at all. And obviously those who still work with film now are used to seeing those negative images. But I think the population as a whole, although everybody's a photographer these days, of course, everybody has their iPhone, and a lot of people use their cameras, but they don't really see those images how they would have been produced in the days of film. So the idea of a negative is alien to them. Is a strange land, because it's not something they're expecting to see. And although you may think it's quite obvious, you look at an image, you think, oh, in negative that'll be obvious. The blacks will be whites, the whites will be black. It's not that straightforward, because the black areas, they don't only look lighter, but they also have this sort of misty quality about them when you convert them to negative. And it's that quality that you get when you convert an image to its negative that gives it this strange appearance, that makes you think you are in a different land. And some of the images are more like that than others. Some could be sort of taken in the sort of Jurassic era. You can imagine dinosaurs roaming, and some are sort of Middle Earth style images. I mean, I'm not into that sort of fantasy landscape thing from a literature point of view, or as a whole. But I like the way that you can transform something that's so banal, an upturned tree and its roots sticking out, that if you were looking at it in the woods, you wouldn't look at it. I mean, you just walk straight past it. And I suppose that is, again, another part of the appeal of this series, is that these are all landscapes that most people would walk past without giving them a second look. They're places that many people have walked past. I doubt if anybody has stopped to take a picture. I doubt if anybody will go back and take a picture, probably not even me, because I'm not going to revisit a lot of these places. And that they are, however, unique landscapes that you can find on your doorstep. People spend a lot of money going on world trips to photograph the great landscapes of the world. Iceland. How many photographers want to go to Iceland if they haven't been already?
I should at this point out that Matt did go to Iceland last year. But anyway,
yes, I did. It was primarily a walking trip, although I did take a few photographs. But yes, I mean that those are amazing landscapes, but you have to travel a long way to get to them, and because they are now such iconic landscapes, everybody travels them to get them, and therefore the world is flooded with these images of these amazing landscapes, and that desensitizes people to them to a certain extent. And sometimes, somehow an iceberg on a black sand beach doesn't seem quite so amazing anymore, because you've already seen several hundred pictures of it. It was like we're talking earlier about the waves at Porthcawl. The first time you see one of those pictures, you think, wow, that's an amazing wave. The 10th time you see it, you think, okay, so it's quite easy to take a picture of that wave. Whereas the landscapes I've been looking for are, I think, just as amazing, because they're just as fantastic. They're quite interesting, and there's a lot of detail in some of them. They're places that most people don't see, are unlikely to visit, but yet all I've done is walk down the road. I haven't travelled very far. A lot of the images in that series have been made in my home village. Actually, a lot of the images in most of my recent series have been made in my home village, which is quite interesting. I live in the Brecon Beacons. I love to go up mountains. I love to travel to new parts of the Brecon Beacons. but probably my most important photography, or certainly most important from my perspective, it is made walking distance from my house.
You've described the Strange Places series as landscape of imagination. How can photography imagine?
I don't know if it's the photography that's imagining it. It's the people when they see those images, because I haven't predefined what's in each of those images. You know, they have a title, they have a number, but I'm not saying what you should see in them. And I want people to use their own imaginations to see the things that they see. And I know from publishing these images online on social media that sometimes people see things that are different to me. And I think that's good. I don't think that people should have to interpret my images the way I want to interpret them. You know, I think there's some flexibility in there for people to see their own views, their own worlds in those images. It's not for me to say this is what you should be seeing. You know, I could give a lot of. I think when I started, I thought about giving them titles that were descriptive, that described what I could see in the images or how they made me feel, which I could do as an expression of my own personal feelings about the images. But I'd much rather people took those images on face value and looked at them and said, "Oh, that's interesting. You know, I can see a snake slithering through the undergrowth, or you know, there's a bird or a butterfly there resting on that rock," where none of these things really exist in the image. I mean, they're all artifacts and part of the process of converting them to negative. And I should maybe mention there's also a bit of a split tone, techie talk, but a bit of a split tone process on there as well, which does change the appearance of the image slightly. But you know, people can see in them what they want. That's fine by me.
I think when you release things out into the world, let other people look at them, then it's inevitable that they're going to take something of themselves.
Yes.
When they look at it.
Yeah, I also think it makes it more interesting for other people as well. And when I look at an image and there's a massive description below it that describes, you know, a more abstract image I'm talking about here, where there's a description which explains exactly what the photographer was aiming at, what they produced, what you should be seeing here. Well, that's great. I think that's quite interesting. It's a nice image. I can see but it doesn't really give me any scope to then say, well, actually, I can see this in it, because I somehow feel inhibited. And I should mention that is the case with some of your Botwood series. That some of those images, I looked at them and I could see other things in them, but you had words with them and that you had ideas about it, and I felt inhibited saying what I could see in them because it was nothing to do with me. They're not my photographs. Far be it from me to try and interpret them. Yeah. But which is fine. Again, you know, that's the way that project works. But my own images, I'm quite happy for people to treat them in a more open-ended way. You know, just the idea that this is an alien world or this is a strange place that you can interpret however you like.
I never really thought with my Botwood that the words were descriptive, that actually they were more of an interplay.
No.
And I think because partly it was poetry, I felt personally anyway that gave me.
I think you're right. It gives a lot more flexibility than some people's descriptions of their images, which gives absolutely no flexibility whatsoever.
You're allowed to see what you like of them.
That's good. I'll go and have another look then.
Yeah. So, what photos do you hang on your walls?
You should note we're sitting in the one room in the house that doesn't have any of my photographs on the walls. I do have photographs on the walls. Maybe I should have given you a tour, shouldn't I? I do change them regular basis, and then I try to count how many days it is before my wife says, "Oh, you've changed the photographs," because that's a sign of whether or not it was worth changing them, and whether or not they're significantly different. I have some of my series of Gower seascapes on my landing, just because they sort of suit the surroundings, and they're quite innocuous. I try not to put anything too challenging on the wall, I suppose, because my family and everybody who visits has got to live with them. And I think there are some of my survivors of Carno Gwinium images in the dining room, but I do change them around fairly regularly. But the frames stay there. But I don't really think about it, to be honest. It tends to be what goes with the decor. I don't try and inflict my latest images on my family. I think probably the first time my wife saw one of the Travels in a Strange Land Dark Spaces series was when I told her it had been shortlisted for the Landscape Photographer of the Year awards. I do tend to keep a lot of it not secret, but I don't tend to publicise it even to my friends and family a lot. I sort of live this secret life on social media where only other photographers see my work.
Yeah.
And partly that's because I don't want to keep showing people all the time that aren't really that interested, whether or not they care. I don't want to keep saying, oh, look at this new image, look at this new image. Apart from anything else, I tend to be quite prolific in the number of images I produce because I spend a lot of time in the landscape. And I think my wife would get fed up if I kept saying, oh, look at the new image I took today, look at the new image I took today. So I don't sort of try and force them on people that aren't interested in them. So
are we an incestuous bunch as landscape photographers? Are we sort of making work for each other and not reaching out to the wider world?
Well, I'd like to think that we're all making work for ourselves, and in some cases it's appreciated by other people. But I think you're right. Probably for a majority of landscape photographers are producing work that is then appreciated by other landscape photographers. I think a lot of landscape photography books that are produced are not bought by the general public because they like the images. They're bought by other landscape photographers because they want to see what's been going on, see what sort of images have been produced and admire them themselves. I think that's one thing that Charlie Waite has tried to do with Landscape Photographer of the Year is make it more of a book for public consumption by trying to showcase the best of landscape photography in the past year. But because of that, it has to appeal to using the phrase the general public. It has to appeal to the average person in the street that might be interested in the landscape, and maybe that does water down what gets put in the book a bit.
So how does the general public access your work? Is it primarily online?
It is, yeah. I'm like anybody, I'd love to have loads of published books of my images. There's a couple of galleries that sell my work, primarily in Brecon, but again, that's the more accessible images. I have managed to persuade the owner to take a few of the more interesting images that I've produced. I used to sell direct in the Brecon Craft Fair, but as part of not focusing on just producing stuff that sold and spending all my time trying to sell it and administering all that side of things, I stopped doing that. And I have self-published a few books, and again, as I've just said, they've probably been sold to photographers. I don't suppose there are many members of the general public that have actually bought those books. I would love some of my images to be more widely available, but how do you go about that without spending the majority of your time on sales and marketing activities and losing the time in the landscape for me, which is more important, or taking the photographs.
Is it something to do with photography in Wales? Are there not enough outlets to show the work that interests you most?
I think it would be fair to say that around here there's not any outlets. There's nothing at all. We really are in the middle of nowhere. And initially, I have toyed with the idea of trying to get some exhibitions for some of my series, and I would really like to do that with a number of them. But there aren't that many venues close to me. There aren't that many venues in Wales, to be honest, and a lot of the venues that were close to me have been shut down thanks to the government cuts and the slashing of the local authority budgets. So it would be great if there were more galleries around here. I see online and hear photographers talk about, there's this gallery, we're showing a work at this gallery, and I think either their work is so much better, they're trying a lot harder, or there are a lot more galleries, and I don't know which it is. I like to think there are just a lot more galleries around there, but I suspect there's probably some of the other things coming into play as well. But yeah, I think if there were more accessible galleries around here, I would certainly have a better stab at getting some of the work out there.
So, is there much of a community of photographers around you, or do you ever meet people, or are you just this sort of wild man of the hills?
No, I'd like to think of myself like that. That would be good. There aren't a lot of people around here, obviously, but I have met up with one or two other photographers, landscape photographers, and I tend not to take many photographs when I'm with other landscape photographers. It's a lot of landscape photographers will say, "Oh, we must go for a walk in the hills. We must go and take some photographs and make some images," and that doesn't really work for me. I mean, I personally need to be on my own to make an image that I like, that has any meaning to me, because I don't want to be flustered by somebody else setting up their tripod next to me, or asking if I finished and we're ready to move on, that sort of thing. So I haven't sought out those opportunities to go out with other photographers. However, it's nice to talk with other photographers, and being in the middle of nowhere, I've made a lot of use of social media to do that. And only recently have I actually met people in real life who I met on social media. And I mean, one of the ways I did that was having those images commended in Landscape Photographer of the Year. I got to go to the opening evening of the exhibition, which was quite nice to actually meet some other photographers that I'd been conversing with for a couple of years. And of course, meeting yourself today. It's quite interesting meeting people in real life and seeing whether or not they match up to their online persona, which thankfully most of them do, good or bad.
I'm not sure if I do or not. Hopefully not.
But there are very few. I mean, yes, there are camera clubs, and actually in South Wales there are a lot of camera clubs, and I use that word camera clubs rather than photography societies, because the people there, and I used to go to Swansea Camera Club. I went there for a year or so, a few years ago, because I thought I would meet like-minded people. Unfortunately, I'm not that interested in the gear I use to take a photograph, or the settings the camera happened to be at that particular time. And unfortunately, a lot of those camera clubs are more focused around the equipment that you have than the images you produce. And again, they're also more focused on single images than series of images. So the series doesn't mean as much in those situations. And I think maybe that will change over time, because maybe this is wishful thinking. I'm hoping that will change over time, as people's photography styles change and they still go to photographic societies or camera clubs. And certainly I think the sort of democratisation of photography, with everybody taking pictures with their iPhone 365 days a year, some people are producing, some people that aren't photographers are producing interesting images that maybe will encourage them to get more involved with a different style of photography. But maybe again that's wishful thinking. But no, there's precious few opportunities to meet other photographers around here, certainly.
I mean, I suppose an iPhone essentially or any camera phone sort of reveals how easy it is to make an image these days.
It does.
You need to do something more.
It does, and you need to do something more, and that's where Instagram comes in, isn't it? The ubiquitous filters. I know, and they get poo-pooed a lot, I have to say, but I sort of admire people's approaches, because they're trying to do something. They're trying to change the image beyond its snapshot value, which as a photographer is something I'm trying to do all the time.
Yeah, sure.
So they're applying a standard filter, or in some applications on their phones, they're interacting with the image a little bit more to provide their own filtration on it. And so that's a good thing. They're trying to be creative with an image. That's got to be applauded. Don't have any problems with that at all. The trouble is, sort of packaged filters just tend to get applied randomly to images without a lot of thought in a lot of cases. Although that can also be said for photographers with DSLRs. There's a lot of packaged filters in software that people are using there as well.
Yeah, and actually the point of that finishing process for us as people who value sort of self-expression through photography is actually that we're guiding people a little bit to see what we want them to see.
Yes, yeah, we're not just applying some purchased filter just for the sake of it. The whole purpose of the transformation that we've carried out on our images is to produce the sort of image, to produce the sort of response that we want in our viewer.
Given where you live, do you tend to take advantage of stock agencies to bring in some extra income?
Yes, I mean, I used to use as one stock agency quite a lot, but I didn't go out and take pictures solely with that in mind. I would upload images I had, and yes, there is a market there, or at least there was a market there. In recent years, that market has diminished quite a lot. I think the prices paid for stock images has dramatically reduced, making it less commercially viable for a lot of photographers to pursue that route. Although I'm well aware that there's a photographer in Aberystwyth who's making £50,000 a year, or $50,000 a year from stock, which is an achievement to be applauded. But I think you've got to be very single-minded to pursue that, and I'm not that commercially focused to worry about that. The other problem with stock and producing images that your local newspapers and the other media outlets would want to use is that these days they can get most of their images for free off Twitter and off Facebook. I'm guilty of this as much as anyone else. Certainly the Brecon Beacons National Park Authority regularly share my images from Facebook on their page, and I don't mind that, because for me that's just promotion of the Brecon Beacons, promotion of the environment in which we live, and there's some nice pictures, so I don't have any problems with that. But
and they credit you, I assume.
Oh yes, well yeah. They always do that, so that's not a problem.
So it's not bad publicity.
No, and that's why I don't have a problem with it. But national newspapers and national media outlets are also starting to pursue this process. I mean, I think the BBC website app on phones now has an option where you can upload your own photo for them to use. There's no question of any money changing hands. It's just the gratitude that you will have for having your image in national media. And so I think that's going to disappear more and more. Certainly as everybody's taking pictures. It's certainly daylight today. It's lovely and snowy. I would imagine on Facebook and Twitter by the end of the day there'll be several hundred, certainly in my feed, of pictures of snowy Brecon Beacons, and most of those will be made fairly freely available for publications to satisfy the ego, shall we say, of the photographer. And that is seen as by some photographers as a terrible thing, that you're destroying the industry and you're just devaluing photography. But maybe a lot of those images didn't have a lot of value in the first place. If they're that easy to capture, then maybe they don't have value and shouldn't have value. In the past with stock imagery, there was a lot of value because it took a lot of effort to go out there and take a picture and develop the film and get it printed and catalogued and indexed and keyworded. These days, I have an app on my own phone which allows me to upload iPhone photographs straight to a stock library, and I do it for some random images that I take on my phone that aren't going to be used anywhere else. A bit of fun. And they do occasionally pay, which is money for nothing, really. So it's worth doing. But you can see how people just get sucked into this. Or these images, I've taken it anyway. It's not really worth anything. Just make it freely available. It's good for a bit of publicity. And I think that sort of publicity is good as long as you've gone out and sought it. You're not. There are some images that I'm quite happy to be shared to help. Say to promote the national park or the landscape, that's fine. But then some of the series I work in, if they started appearing on a site that was commercial and hoping to make money either from advertising or some way by using those images, I think that would be a bit more upsetting. But generally, I think you have to accept this is the situation. If your images are generic enough that they could have been produced by anyone, then they probably don't have a lot of value. If your images are unique enough to you that everybody knows you produced them, then they're not going to be used like that. They're not going to be ripped off by news outlets because people will instantly recognise them. And to be frank, most of the images I produce are very unlikely to be used commercially. I think there was
but they have value in a different way, don't they? They
have value in a different way, yeah. There was a couple of talks at the awards evening for the landscape photographer of the year, and I think it was the guy from Visit Britain was standing up saying how all these images are fantastic and they show the beauty of the great British landscape and will encourage people to visit the UK. And I was thinking of my images that were included in the book, thinking, to be honest, my images would probably just scare people away. All sorts of strange things in them. I'm not sure they would work as a media campaign to help people come and visit the depths of Wales. Come and see what you might find in the forests.
So if we're sort of in a point of time where photography is almost becoming a free-to-use medium, how does a photographer fight back? How do they make a living?
Well, they make a living by producing something new and interesting and unique. In the same way as everybody has access to a pen or a paintbrush, anybody can produce a picture. At school, everybody is taught art at a certain level, but they don't all go on to become artists who have their work exhibited in galleries. And equally, there's a lot of people out there with cameras. They all produce photographs, but do they produce images that are worth hanging on the gallery wall? Well, there's a whole other discussion around that, I'm sure.
If you can find a gallery wall.
Yeah, if you can find a gallery wall for a start. But I think you need to produce something that's sufficiently interesting and challenging to make it unique. I think that's how you differentiate yourself from the citizen journalist out there with their iPhone taking every picture that you could previously only take with thousands of pounds worth of equipment. I don't think the situation is going to get any better, but I think that there's enough photographers out there producing interesting new work that it's not really a thing to be worried about.
Tell us what you think about photography education in Wales. Does it matter? Can you teach yourself? Does it have any impact?
Well, okay, so I first and foremost, I'd consider myself self-taught in photography. I certainly never had any formal training when I had a darkroom in my bedroom, and you just learn through trial and error. And that has a lot of advantages. When I gave up my IT job and decided to focus solely on photography, I thought I'd better go and get a qualification in it. Be a good thing. Maybe also meet some like-minded people. So I enrolled myself first on a City and Guilds course, and then later on an A-level course in Swansea College. And that was quite interesting because a couple of things I realised from being on those courses is that it's very hard to teach someone to be creative, and being creative is what's most important, certainly in the photography I produce. You can teach people the basics of how to use a camera, but I knew that obviously before I went there, and in fairness, most of the people that go on those courses already know the technology and what an f-stop is and what a shutter speed is. So there's very limited amount of teaching you can provide in an arts-based photography degree. So we spent a lot of time just talking, which I suppose is a good thing. I suppose that's maybe is the positive thing about photography education, is being, or same as any education, is being surrounded by like-minded and focused people that want to try and do the same thing as you. So you can have discussions with them, and you've got an audience, a ready-made audience to show your work to, who ought to be interested. You don't have to go and find it. So I think it's very hard to formally teach an artistic subject. And the people I've seen then to go on to do degrees in photography have come out with some very interesting work, but from what I've heard, they weren't actually taught anything there. It's almost as if those arts-based subjects are like doing further degrees and research. I mean, I have a scientific background. I did a first degree and I got taught lots of stuff. And I did a postgraduate degree, and I didn't get taught anything. I had to learn it for myself through trial and error. And I think that probably arts-based degrees are very much like that. You can be given some basic information, but really it's about exploring the world with your camera if you're a photographer. Doing a lot of reading, maybe working out what people have done in the past, if not only to hopefully not emulate it, but to avoid any of the same mistakes. It's always good to study from a certain point of view the history of a subject. But in terms of producing your own outputs, there's no way that anybody can teach you creativity. I think you've either got creativity or you haven't, and I think there are some people that just haven't got any creativity, or maybe not in the area they're pursuing it in. So I think from the point of view of education, there's not a lot of scope for teaching beyond the mechanics of how you produce a photograph and how you develop. And
do you ever get asked by any of the educational bodies in Wales to come and do a talk to their students?
Well, first and foremost, I would probably try and avoid giving a talk if at all possible. So I don't like the subject. I have actually given a talk to a camera club in the past, and that was an interesting experience, to say the least. But I have been quite a few times now. I've been interviewed by students from a local secondary school in Brecon, and where they teach A-level photography, and that's been quite interesting, just to see students who are interested in pursuing that as a potential career. The sort of questions they have, and they are very much focused around the commercial side of things. They always want to know, how much of your income do you make by doing portraits, or how much, but they don't really ask the questions about creativity, which is quite interesting, because first and foremost I see photography as a creative pursuit, but I think a lot of people go in to study photography at A level and later on degree level because they want a career in it, which is fair enough. I can understand that, and a lot of careers in photography obviously have to be commercially focused. You've got to make money, you've got to live, and the sort of photography you have to do to live, as you well know, doing weddings, is very different from the sort of photography we're talking about here in terms of producing an image that has creative input.
Yeah, you're making images to please the client rather than making images to please yourself. That's a big difference. And actually, one of the skill sets as a commercial photographer is actually to be able to interpret a brief.
Yes, and maybe that is the sort of thing that at a degree level you should be taught if you're going on to study photography. Yeah. That's probably a more useful thing to be taught than some of the other things you may be taught.
Well, I think actually for myself, learning to interpret a brief almost led to sort of setting my own briefs.
Yes, so setting your own goals. Yeah. But I think even in the industry I came from in IT, by taking someone's requirements for a piece of software and working that into a specification for the software, it's the same thing as understanding people's briefs. But there, of course, is the other side to photography education, which is the ubiquitous workshop, which any self-respecting landscape photographer ought to be offering these days, it seems. And that there are a lot of them around here is something I personally don't like the idea of, because I don't think you can teach creativity, and I don't really want to just teach someone how to use their camera. People can learn that quite easily themselves. I don't mind going for a walk with someone with their camera. That's great. I could help them with any technical aspects, but I don't see that as an interesting thing to do from a creative point of view. And I don't think you're necessarily going to make a more creative, a better photographer by going on one of these workshops. You might just be surrounded by like-minded people, and maybe that is a good thing. I know I've discussed that in the past. There is a lot to be gained by sitting around discussing with like-minded photographers, but actually going out and all photographing the same scene with your tripods lined up. I don't know.
Do you think it's sort of part of the role of an artist, though, to engage with people who are maybe interested and just try and help them to think differently or see the world differently? Help them to start to follow that path of creativity? Because it's a very personal thing.
It is. How do you do that, I suppose, would be my question. It is a very personal thing, and I have trouble enough explaining how I see things. To try and explain, help someone find their own vision is a tricky thing to do. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is trial and error and experimentation. You've got to go out there. And I think a lot of photography education is about experimentation. It's about going out there and just trying this. People always say, "Oh, this is the in technique for this year." Your 10-stop filter is so last year. But actually, by giving someone a technique to go out and play with, they might produce something interesting. So I suppose there is some value in that. So we all learn these techniques. We try them a few times, but it's once you've got this armory of techniques, is to actually go out and use them creatively to try and get your message across. I think unfortunately some people stop at the accumulation of different techniques and larger bits of equipment and fancier cameras and higher resolution sensors, and they think that by buying a better camera they're going to suddenly become more creative. You're not. Some of the most creative images I've seen have been made with pinhole cameras. And you can't get much more basic than that.
Sure, yeah.
I don't have the patience to wait that long. I haven't tried it myself.
Do you think you have in any way a duty to up-and-coming photographers or people who are new to photography? Would you, for example, consider mentoring somebody if you thought they had some talent?
Mentoring? Well, I think that's fine if it's being requested by the person. I think that there's a lot of confusion with providing feedback to people. Some people don't want feedback on their images, and that could be considered mentoring when you're giving that feedback. Sometimes it's not very welcome. I tend to only give feedback to people when it's requested. I think people, if they're happy in the way they do things, that's fine. But if people are seeking out mentoring in terms of a way of sort of furthering their photographic practice, then that's fine. I don't see any problem with it. You mentioned about studio photographers having assistants. I think it's very difficult with landscape photography to have an assistant. Even if you were doing it as a very commercial practice, you're such at the mercy of the elements out there. It's very difficult to go out and specifically teach people anything. I'm trying to work out how that would work in my own mind. I think a lot of what I would call mentoring is people providing positive and negative but constructive feedback on the way you're going. I mean, I've certainly benefited in social media in that sense, that there are some people out there, yourself included actually, Rob, who provide the sort of feedback on images I want. Not, oh, that's a fantastic image, but, well, that's interesting, it makes me think of this. Have you thought about doing that? And I haven't requested that necessarily, but I've appreciated it. But I think it's very hard with some photographers to know whether or not they are open to that sort of mentoring. And
I think it's how you frame the response as well, though, isn't it? And I think that took me a long time to learn, because sometimes I would just, especially on social media, it's very easy to say, well, I've seen that before.
Yeah, when you've only got 100 and whatever it is characters, it's quite easy to miss out the social niceties.
Yes, exactly.
Just get straight to the point.
Yeah.
No, and it is difficult. I don't know. I suppose I'm trying to work out whether or not, if I was going to mentor another photographer, how I would even approach that.
I suppose what we're thinking about really is you've been on a sort of personal journey, both sort of commercially and in terms of your self-expression. And is there a way of shortening that journey, helping them cross a few bridges?
I don't know. From the business side, probably yes.
Yeah.
From the personal creativity side, I don't know. I think you've got to find your own way personally. I think there's a danger of producing clones of yourself in terms of the style of photography. If I was to spend a lot of time with someone mentoring them in photography, the danger is they would come out producing images with a similar processing style to me, with a similar composition to me. And although that might be fine for those people, they might be quite happy, and other people might appreciate their work, I would feel like I'd done them a disservice. Because, again, the whole point of that sort of photography is to be creative and produce original work that is from you.
So really you're saying the only answer is to get out there and do it?
I think so. I personally think it's, there's this 10,000 hours rule, isn't there, about becoming good in anything. You've got to spend a lot of time doing it. And I think the time spent doing it is perhaps more important than what people just teach you on the way. I think that there's practice, experimentation, making mistakes. People are scared of making mistakes, especially when they make mistakes and they publish it on social media and people tell them it's a mistake. They don't like that at all. But actually, that's probably the most valuable lesson they could have learned for their whole time on social media. They've probably learned something useful. And some people, I'm sure, realise that. I mean, I personally don't have a problem when people are openly critical of my images, although I don't invite it. But it's it's hard to take sometimes, especially if it's an image that you're proud of. But the passage of time can make you realise that image wasn't that good, or that there's something that could be improved about it. But it's difficult, especially if it's a very personal piece of work, for people to have any opinion about it that's negative at all.
Yeah, we've all been there on social media. It can be really quite painful, can't it?
Yeah, it can.
You've invested a lot of time and energy and effort, and somebody turns around and goes, don't think much of that series. Yeah,
and then the temptation is, well, what would you do? Do you just stop? But I think you should just carry on. I mean, there are some series that I've just carried on putting out there, and you don't get anything back. And I thought, well, eventually I'll just peter out, and I won't bother putting anything on social media, because obviously nobody else is that interested. But I'll carry on just doing it myself. That's fine.
So, is there anything you would tell your former self from what you've learned over the years?
Anything I tell my former self. You know, you'd always like to go back, wouldn't you, and visit the places and have all that time that you had in the past with the knowledge you had now. That's the trouble, isn't it? I certainly in the recent past, I wish I'd, in 2004 or whatever it is when I escaped the rat race, I wish I'd just focused on going out, producing images that I liked, and learning to develop the style of image that I maybe ended up with now, and hadn't just jumped straight into this quick, I've got to find someone to sell my photography.
You've got to justify your existence.
Justify my existence. Even if I don't have to justify my existence from the point of view of hand to mouth food and heating, I can't spend all this time on photography if it's not going to make any money. But I think there are a lot of creative pursuits, a lot of arts, where you can't justify it based on how much money it pays. A lot of visual and other performing arts just wouldn't be produced if it was solely commercially viable. Mm-hmm. So, and given that I was in the position where I maybe didn't have to worry about that, I wish I hadn't bothered.
Yeah.
And I think if I hadn't bothered, maybe then now I would be in a better position to find commercial outlets for my work, or the sort of work that I want to have commercial outlets, rather than the work I was selling back then.
So you would have established yourself as somebody who was more interested in selling personal work than in selling commercial work.
Yes.
So your name would be different.
It would be, and part of the problem I have now is that the places where my work is sold, it's associated with the sort of fairly straight landscape images that a tourist might buy, or someone local who wants a nice picture on their wall that represents the view they see out of their window. And it's been very hard to change your style in that one outlet to include your personal work. And we're not that well endowed with outlets around here for me to then just ignore that one and let's go on to another place to try and sell that work. And also, we are in the middle of nowhere in the countryside. I'm sure in a cosmopolitan city like Cardiff, there would be potentially more outlets for the sort of work I now like to produce. Or at least there might be some outlets for the sort of work I like to produce. So maybe I have to look further afield. I suppose I've been a bit lazy in that sense, and I've sort of just relied on internet and social media to try and get my work out there. But it would be nice to have a commercial outlet for the work I actually really value now. But it's hard when you live in the middle of nowhere.
Do you think the monetisation of photography is generally damaging?
Oh, obviously it is, from the point of view of popular things don't necessarily make them good. There's no the most popular daily newspaper in the UK is not the best quality daily newspaper in the UK, and I think the same will go for a lot of work that is commercially viable. Just because it's popular and it sells doesn't necessarily mean it has the level of quality that some of us would like to produce in our work. So I think by monetising it, you have to appeal to not necessarily the lowest common denominator, but you have to lower your aims a bit in terms of maybe the artistic output. I was saying it's a bit like the book that has been produced as part of Landscape Photographer of the Year by Charlie Waite. There's a lot of good images in there, really good images in there that I really like, but there's a lot of images in there that are popularist in the sense that your gran could enjoy them, and I think that's probably a good thing for the point of view of that book, because it will sell to the general public. I think conversely there are a lot of art photography books that I might want to buy or I've bought that probably don't appeal to anyone, or don't appeal to very many people at all, or only appeal to other photographers because they can appreciate the creative input that's gone into it. But I don't think they're necessarily very commercially viable. I know a book publisher that we're both aware of who's had to shy away from producing some photographer's work because it won't be commercially viable. Even those that are on the edge of producing fantastic photo books, if they've got to go sell thousands of copies, it's a lot harder to produce interesting work out there.
Do you think people don't recognise photography as an art form in Wales?
I think a lot of people don't recognise photography as an art form in the world, which is about Wales. I think it is looked down upon by a lot of people in the art world, because it's superficially very easy to produce an image. You don't have to expend a lot of effort with a brush and a lot of expensive paint and a lot of hours to produce an image. You can produce an image just by pressing a button. But what they don't take into account is the thought that went on before that, the thought that went on after that, all the images that preceded and follow it, that make that piece of work more interesting for the viewer. I don't know. I think photography has been recognised as an art for quite a while now, among some people, but the general perception, I think, in the world is that it's quite easy to produce a good photograph. You just need to buy a more expensive camera.
So is there scope for photographers maybe sort of banding together to help maybe exhibit their work or show their work somehow, so that rather than each of us being an atomised individual, actually we can come together and create a greater whole?
I think there is a lot of potential for that. I think it's been done in some parts of the country, or parts of the UK. I think it'd be a fantastic thing, really, because I think as individuals, photographers have a very small voice, and certainly when you're looking at getting an exhibition in a gallery, it's a lot easier if there are a group of photographers who can present a whole set of different works to a gallery that maybe they could consider showing individually or together in the future. I think there's it's a stronger voice. It's a lot harder for an individual to approach some places to exhibit or sell work than it is a larger group of people. So yeah, I think there's a huge scope there.
Yeah, agreed.